In 1983, police in Manhattan Beach, California sent an alarming letter to parents whose children attended McMartin Preschool. A mother of a 2-year-old at the school had told the authorities that her son had been sexually abused, and the police were looking for additional victims or possible witnesses. But the mother had told the police other stories as well, claiming that her son had also described seeing a goat man, that he'd witnessed a ritual-type atmosphere, and that he'd seen one of his teachers flying in the air. Then, to the horror of parents, administrators, and the authorities, other children at McMartin began to recount similarly terrifying stories. They described seeing teachers beat a horse to death with a baseball bat, squeeze a parakeet to death, and sacrifice a baby in a church. The children even claimed that they'd been forced to drink the baby's blood. They described secret tunnels beneath their preschool and a game called Lookout in which some of the children would stand guard while their teachers took turns molesting their classmates. However, these shocking accounts quickly came under scrutiny. It later came out that the mother who had raised the original complaint suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and that the children had been asked leading questions. Nevertheless, many of the teachers at McMartin Preschool were forced to stand trial and deny the allegations. Finally, after several years, all the charges against them were dismissed. But how did such a case even get to trial in the first place? The answer lies in the fact that at the time, America was in the thick of a strange cultural moment now known as the Satanic Panic. During this time, McMartin Preschool was hardly the only institution, and not even the only preschool, to face accusations of conducting sinister rituals or practicing Satanism. Corporations, musicians, and even game designers also faced allegations of dabbling in Satanism in the 1980s and the 1990s. Americans seemed to see the devil around every corner. But why? How exactly did the Satanic Panic come into being? How did it touch every corner of American society? And did it ever really end? Today, we'll discuss the possible roots of the Satanic Panic, including how one book called Michelle Remembers first helped it spread, and why the strange American phenomenon, in some ways, never really went away. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
Today, we're discussing the Satanic Panic, the bizarre bout of hysteria that gripped the United States in the 1980s and the 1990s.
It went on for a long time.
It did, yeah.
It's actually staggering how long this lasted.
Yeah, I think it actually lasted longer than most people even think. It's kind of associated with the 80s, but I would argue that its roots maybe began the 70s.
I was going to say, it feels like late 70s, maybe around the time of Amityville.
Exactly.
Which I guess was 74. So mid 70s, because you kind of get the rise of Ed and Lorraine Warren during that time. And they were really, they were benefiting from this hysteria, this big satanic fear.
They found an audience for it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. 1974 was also, actually, let me check this. No, it is. Yeah, because this year's the 50th anniversary of it. 1974, funnily enough, the same year that Dungeons and Dragons came out.
Yes, we were going to talk Dungeons, Dragons, movies, all of it. But yeah, I thought we could kind of start with where this maybe came from. And it seems like the seeds of Satanic Panic probably began, and kind of in this, maybe even the very late 60s and into the 70s, where you can argue that society is really changing. Women are going to work now, which means that children are less supervised. People have these new concerns about what are your kids doing when your parents aren't there. At the same time, the country's changed a lot. Watergate, the Vietnam War, people just kind of trust institutions less than they used to.
Funny to think, too, what possible devilry, for pardon the pun, could children have been getting up to home alone in the 70s? And a pre-internet era. I mean, obviously they could set fire to the house or whatever.
Yeah, but, do drugs or drink or stuff like that. But I think people did worry about that because youth culture was changing too. It had been the 60s and the Beatles and whatever, and then suddenly it was the 70s and rock and roll. And I worked on this article. I updated it. I didn't write it, the original one, but I cited this very famous quote from Joan Didion, and she says that the Manson murders in 1969 marked the end of the 60s. And I was like, I think they might also mark the beginning of the Satanic Panic in a way, because that was such a horrible, bloody, like, and even the Manson members kind of incited or invoked the devil in their stuff. Yeah.
Even just the worshiping of him instead of God was like, ooh, didn't realize people
they're
could
worshiping
do that.
evil, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Then as you brought up, interestingly, as we move into the 70s, there's a bunch of movies that deal with demons and Satans. In addition to Amityville, there's also The Omen, 1976, and The Exorcist in 1973. So there's kind of like a little trend going on about people consuming this stuff in culture.
The Exorcist is such an interesting one to cite, because I know at the time it was really horrific and people were like running out of the theater and vomiting and things like that. But I have a friend who's very, very, very into The Exorcist, both the movie and the book that it was based on. And we always laugh when people say that it is somehow, like, by enjoying this movie, you're somehow worshiping the devil. Because the plot of The Exorcist is that a priest who has, like, lost his faith then saves a girl from a demon by finding God again. I was like, you can't get more pro-Christian than that plot of that movie.
Yeah, the priest is the good guy, the hero.
Right.
Yeah, but I guess, it does suggest there's evil among us.
Sure, but I guess no one is ever denying that.
Yeah.
It's just people wanted to like shield their eyes to it. I guess you didn't want to show it on screen, but I mean, that's part of the teaching of the church is like, hey, the devil's here and he's going to try and tempt you and do all these things. So you've got to have faith in God.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm trying to think of like how, like religious ideas maybe were also part of the Satanic Panic, but I'm not sure I have a fully formed thought about that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get there by the end.
In addition to the movies, there's also this sort of like people started seeing Satan in like corporations. And the two examples I have is that in 1978, McDonald's had to come out and deny that its founder, Ray Kroc, they had to deny that he was financially supporting the Church of Satan, because this rumor had spread that he'd gone on the Phil Donahue show, it's like a talk show, and had admitted to this on TV. And, it wasn't like now where you could look up the clip on YouTube. People claimed that he had said this and then it spread. But it was hard to kind of verify. And though he was on the show, the transcript does exist, and he never said anything about Satan, but
yeah,
they did have to publicly deny that. And then in 1980, another rumor spread that Procter and Gamble's logo, which originally had 13 stars, which was a nod to the 13 original colonies, was actually a symbol of the devil. And it became
interesting.
It became such a thing that they changed their logo that they'd had for like 100 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It's weird. It started to really kind of like manifest itself in American culture. This was all kind of like simmering, like going on. And then in 1980, this book comes out called Michelle Remembers, which I think is probably the thing that most people would associate with the Satanic Panic. It's a book it's nonfiction. It's written by a therapist named Lawrence Pazder and his patient, Michelle Smith. And she has started seeing him for help after a miscarriage. They were together for 2 years. They also eventually got married. So that's kind of an interesting, odd twist there. But
it's a little unethical, I think.
A little bit. During her therapy, he started practicing discredited form of therapy called recovered memory therapy. And suddenly all these things that she'd forgotten, like, were, allegedly revived. And they were some pretty incredible, unbelievable stuff. She said that when she was 5, she suddenly remembered that she had been given to strangers who were really members of a satanic cult. She said she was tortured, abused. She'd witnessed a satanic orgy in which one of the members was murdered, that she was buried alive, that she was forced to kill kittens, like all these really disturbing things.
Crazy if true.
Right. She said on her 81st day there, the cult members performed a ritual and the devil appeared and okay. And crucially, she said at one point, I think today it's very, very wise to take a good hard look at where you place your children. into whose care you place your child.
I see. So this kickstarts this panic of people going like, oh my God, what are these daycares doing to my children?
Yeah.
While we're both at work.
Yeah, what are our kids doing when we can't watch them?
I feel like it's important to note, too, that Pazder, the way he did this discredited form of therapy, or the way this memory recovered therapy works, is hypnosis. And just quickly looking up the fact of the matter here. According to him, he was seeing Smith as a patient for 14 months doing this quote unquote therapy with her. And that during that time, she spent more than 600 hours under hypnosis.
Wow.
Which seems like a very easy way to manipulate someone's memories and possibly implant false ones.
Yeah. Well, if you think, too, if you're living in a culture where this stuff is kind of already in the air, maybe you can make its way into your subconscious and then... Sure.
And into your bank account if you get a good book out of it.
Right. Yeah. So this book comes out in 1980. In 1983, this was set up in the intro a bit, but this fear of Satan makes its way to preschools, most famously the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, which a mother went to the police and said that her young son, he was 2, had been abused by someone at the school.
Oh.
And more strangely, I guess, she said that the boy claimed that there was a ritual type atmosphere at the school.
That's a really wild thing for like, what's preschool age? Like 4?
I mean, he was even younger. He's only 2, but
he's only 2. Yeah, for him to come.
I doubt he said ritual type atmosphere.
Mommy, there's a ritual type atmosphere at my school. Like,
right.
What?
She got the impression that's what existed.
I see.
She also, it did later come out that she was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and she later died of alcoholism. So she did have some problems of her own. But she went to the authorities and told them this, and then, this had to be investigated, of course. And the investigators who started looking into this started hearing more and more stories about this like horrible, just unbelievable abuse that was happening at the school.
Yeah. Yes. Unbelievable.
Well, it was like killing animals or like killing babies in a church, like the stuff that. But this investigation was like pretty flawed. It started by them sending this letter to 200 parents, which caused panic and bias from the very beginning. And then investigators would ask questions like leading questions like, "Can you remember the naked pictures?" So that could get like, And then the children were also told that their classmates had already confessed, quote unquote, yucky secrets. And one child that hesitated to speak was called a scaredy cat.
By the cops?
Yeah, by the investigators.
That's crazy.
I don't think it was the cops. It was like some other like organization.
Oh, sure. Okay, I see. Okay. Either way.
Not good, yeah. One confessed later that he had lied because of the investigators' pressure. And at the very start, when they started asking the kids questions, most students denied anything had gone wrong. But at the end, they all started describing or maybe not all of them, but a majority described this horrific abuse that they'd seen at their school. So that was one.
Yikes.
Yeah. The administrators went on trial for this. The trial was dragged on for years. Eventually, all the charges against them were dismissed. So there's that. It is like possible. Right. I've read things that like something bad could have happened to the 2-year-old. Like he could have been abused or something that could have actually happened. But then this spiraled into this bigger thing. And these stories they told just didn't. It was unbelievable stories.
Right.
And it wasn't the only preschool where this happened. Like other preschools also had similar type accusations and investigations about wild ritual type things going on, dark rooms or whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, the schools are like one example, but this was like much bigger than just that. You brought up Dungeons and Dragons, and in 1983, there was a mother whose son had died by suicide, and she formed an organization bothered about Dungeons and Dragons or bad, and claimed that the game encouraged devil worship and was replete with demonology and satanic type rituals, and that this was a dangerous thing to let into your children's lives.
Yeah, I mean, if you play a warlock, sure.
Uh-huh.
But I've heard that argument too from just my stepfather-in-law. I'm not married, but the easiest way to describe him. His son also played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and he still makes comments about how it's devil worship. I'm like,
really?
Dog, it's straight up just a game.
That's so interesting. Does he also think that like fantasy books with?
I don't know. He might say it in a more joking way. It's kind of hard to tell. He has this sarcastic inflection, but it's also like you could just be thinking that and saying it in a way that doesn't sound as controversial.
Yeah. I guess a game is sort of different than like a book because you are immersing yourself in Dungeons and Dragons. I've never played it before, but my understanding is that you take on another identity and maybe
it's a role-playing game. Yeah.
Right.
So you play the role of a character.
Yes.
You act it out. You do voices and stuff. You don't have to do voices, but a lot of people do.
Maybe people saw some sort of like some danger there.
He's also a very like he hunts and he's a very is an ex-military man, so he's not I don't think regardless he's reading fantasy novels. So it's hard to gauge his opinion on fantasy. His wife reads fantasy stuff and watches fantasy movies, so I don't think that's the problem.
Okay. Well, it sounds like he's a different definition of like fun than his son.
Yeah.
In another kind of similar case concerning a band, in 1985, these two young men agreed to a suicide pact. One died, one didn't. And the survivors' parents sued the band Judas Priest because their songs allegedly contained hidden messages like "Do it" and "Let's be dead." The band was found not liable afterwards. But I think there was a lot of... I don't think they were the only band that people... I mean, obviously, even the Beatles back in the day, people found hidden messages and things.
Sure. Yeah. Judas Priest probably just targeted for the fact that they were called Judas Priest.
Yeah, right. That's probably true. And then one final, another kind of horrible example. In the 90s, 1993, these three young boys they were 8 years old. They were killed by, or allegedly killed, I guess, by three teenagers. And the prosecution alleged the teenagers, who were called the Memphis Three, had killed the boys in a satanic ritual.
Yeah.
They were convicted but later freed. So
yeah, that was a very... I did an update for our post on the West Memphis Three, and it's a very interesting case. There's basically no evidence pointing to these three kids. When I say basically, there was no evidence pointing to these three kids. There was no suggestion that they should have, other than the fact that they were one of them was kind of a goth, and they were all like, two of them were high school dropouts. One of them was actually like, he had like pretty good prospects. People considered him like smart. And like he had a bright future ahead of him, but he was friends with, I forget their names, friends with the one kid who dropped out of high school who dressed very gothy, and they just weren't in school that day. And so people were like, oh, they clearly look at these kids. They must have been the ones to abuse and murder these boys. There was a little bit more evidence, and I don't think the guy's ever been implicated officially, but to suggest that one of their stepfathers was actually the one, because he was like the last person seen with them, and he had said some misleading things to investigators when they looked into it. So
was there... I know that it was a brutal murder, but was that the only reason why they thought it was satanic, was because of just how brutal it was? Okay.
Yeah, the kids were found like naked and tied up in the woods. So people thought like, oh, maybe it was a satanic ritual, like a sacrifice. But realistically, it's more likely just like really terrible sexual abuse and murder from a non-goth teen. Not a teen, my point being.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, I don't think they ever officially implicated anyone else, so I won't make accusations, but I will say the evidence points to stepfather of one of the boys and one of his friends, more than the evidence points to the West Memphis Three.
I see. Well... yeah, at the time, at least, people found an easy explanation was that, Satan was involved somehow, which I guess maybe is also easy to do when something so horrible happens to... Yeah.
I think the one kid from that was the inspiration for Eddie in Stranger Things.
Which one's Eddie?
Eddie is the, in the fourth season, the guy in charge of the school's Hellfire Club who plays D&D.
I think I stopped watching after the third season.
Oh. Well, that'll do it. He was a very popular character in the fourth season, like probably the standout character of that season. If anyone listening has seen, you know who I'm talking about. Even though the show is set in the 80s, still at the height of the Satanic Panic, D&D was still around, so they kind of looked, and I think he was loosely based off of one of the West Memphis Three.
It's kind of an interesting point, actually, about Stranger Things, because even though the show was made like 10 years, it does kind of combine the 80s with this idea of like there's evil like all around, and which is a very 1980s thing.
Yeah, very conspiratorial as well. A lot of like MK Ultra influence stuff. Stranger Things is a good show. I like it.
I loved the first season, and I felt like it all went kind of downhill after that.
I have one friend who just like does not like it, and I'm like, I simply don't understand why.
Yeah, it's so fun. I really enjoyed that first season. All the kids are old now.
Yeah, it's weird.
So it goes. In any case, yeah, this was kind of like the height of the Satanic Panic in the 80s with preschools and Dungeons and Dragons and music and everything. And then in the 90s, it kind of ebbed. But like, did it ever really go away? And I guess the closest equivalent we have today, perhaps, is QAnon. I'm not saying they're the satanic ones, but they believe that there is some sort of like secret cabals and, you know, people who torture children and conduct these rituals. And they still see evidence of that in society. So that, to me, seems pretty similar to what the Satanic Panic was at its height.
Yeah, like the Pizzagate thing.
Exactly.
Where they thought a pizza shop's basement was where Democratic pedophile elites were auctioning off children and things like that. Yeah, I guess it's just become more fringe, but I don't think it really has gone away.
Yeah, I think, well, and again, I think it's sometimes, well, QAnon is a whole different thing. I think trying to find evidence of Satan in like that realm is one thing, and trying to ascribe really horrible things to demons or Satan is like a different thing. Like horrible murders or tragedies or... Yeah,
I think there's like a changing of the times. A lot of the people who were concerned about the Satanic Panic were older, who were not familiar with like, you know, there was a big pushback when rock and roll burst onto the scene. Even with Elvis, like what we consider tame rock and roll. And then you have like more hardcore bands, metal bands coming onto the scene, who definitely leaned into like pagan imagery a lot of the time.
Yeah. And the country was moving to the right, Ronald Reagan, evangelicals, and they probably looked for things that were, you know, bad in society, or those two contrasts existed anyway.
Right. Yeah, and like you made a good point about Dungeons and Dragons. Like, if it's such a weird concept for a game at the time, you know, to be playing this game where it's like, what do you mean? What do you do? It's like we just sit around and we pretend to be elves and dwarves and things. It's like, what do you mean? We just sit around with pens and paper and we pretend to be fantasy creatures. And we fight demons, and they're like, demons are in it.
Yeah.
And inherently somebody has to then play the demon because, you know, the dungeon master or whatever is doing the voice. So, you know, you're a 60-year-old mom, and you're like, I'm going to take some snacks down to my son and his friends who are down there playing, I don't know, some game that you think is going to be like Monopoly, and you walk in and they're all dressed in robes and they're like, Mephistopheles burns in the fires of that. And it's like, oh, you start praying and panicking. It's a weird thing to walk into.
That might be a little confusing. Yeah. If you're expecting Monopoly Yeah,
there's this big, like, when things like this happen and become widespread, it really speaks to a lack of curiosity in a lot of people, where when they're confronted with something new and something unfamiliar, and we can expand this metaphor or whatever into like queer communities coming up as well. When people of a certain worldview who are more closed off and really attached to their view of the world come in contact with something new, a lot of the time, rather than ask questions or try and understand it, they reject it because it doesn't fit what they think. And I'm not even just talking about like conservatives. I don't want this to sound like I'm just like attacking religious or a certain political belief. This happens with people who lean left as well.
Yeah.
They just, you know, people just don't like to ask questions about things or try to understand things. They just reject it and they go, well, that doesn't fit my perception, so it's bad.
Well, and I think when things that are bad do happen. Like I said before, it's you look for a reason. It's these parents that we brought up with Dungeons and Dragons and Judas Priest, they lost their children or almost lost their children. They're like, why? Oh, it's the devil. Like something made them do this. I mean, you can even talk about like Columbine and goths or that kind of music or whatever being like a reason. It's a little bit different, but
well, no, it's the same. I mean, sort of the same thing because what was her name? Jasmine Richardson, the like 12-year-old girl who killed her entire family. She was really into goth culture and things like that. But obviously, most goths haven't murdered their entire family. But a lot of people blamed that, and really was probably more of like a confluence of like mental health issues, early access to the internet. Her being manipulated by an older guy. Like there's a lot of different factors that like now in 2024, we have a little bit more understanding about mental health and why people would kill themselves. But back then, you know, 50 years ago, you were like, I don't know, my son was playing this game and there's a demon on the cover and then he killed himself. Yeah. So obviously it's the game. I think the same conversation happened like with violent video games in like the early 2000s. People said the same sort of thing, like, oh, video games are making people violent, and it's like categorically untrue. But
yeah, actually I don't have any like evidence either way, but I guess I don't know, I have nothing to back up my statement, so I guess I'll just not say it. But
well, no, now I'm curious.
I don't know, when you have video games you're like shooting people, I feel like that must desensitize people to actually shooting people.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some cases, but I do think most people have the ability to recognize when something's fiction and not real.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mental health does play a role. I guess I'm thinking about like school shootings in particular, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, even on 1999, I guess video games weren't as violent in 1999. So
no, but like later,
I know that was a part of the conversation, though.
Yeah, I feel like then it was mostly like Marilyn Manson and Yeah.
I think a big part of it too, I've always put out the counter argument that if somebody really wants to murder, they have a video game that lets, well, one, if they really want to murder real people, they'll murder real people regardless. But also maybe video games could be an outlet for those tendencies.
Maybe. I mean, it could also be like something that scratches the itch, but like isn't enough. And
that's true.
It's like serial killers who watch like violent pornography or something, and then like they go and do horrible things.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. I've played video games my entire life. I've never murdered anybody. So
not yet.
Yeah, true. Right. Yeah. If I ever get in trouble, come back to this podcast and
cite that, to be played nonstop on the news.
But no, I mean, yeah, there is an argument to be made that exposure to certain amounts of violence, but there's also point in case here. I just saw the new Nosferatu.
Oh yeah.
And then I went back and watched some of the original 1922 one, and then I watched a little bit of the 1979 one just to like compare. And the 1922 one was considered horrifying for the time,
right? And
now it's very goofy to watch. It's a 100-year-old movie.
It's silent, goofy. Right?
And it's a silent film as well.
Yeah.
But people were terrified. And like you mentioned, people thought the actor who played
Max
Orlok,
I want to say,
Max Schreck or whatever, people thought he might have actually been a vampire because he was so convincing in it. But now you go back and you're like, that is a ridiculous looking outfit they put him in. And the new Nosferatu is much more horrifying and technically impressive. And again, it's 100 years of movie making. But like overall media literacy has kind of evolved with the technology. And so we see something on a screen now and we're like, maybe not everybody does this. I have a film background, but I stopped being less afraid of horror movies after going to film school because you start to see how the movie's made and how those things come together on screen.
Right, how the sausage is made.
Yeah, how the sausage is made. So the sensibilities we had back in the day when these things were first coming out versus the sensibilities we have now. And I think video games fall into that same category. Like maybe at first it was like, oh God, this is horrible. What do you mean you can play as somebody who rips out somebody else's spine in Mortal Kombat? That's insane. But now it's like, well, yeah, no, but we recognize there's a separation between reality and what you're seeing on a screen. I remember there was like a very early film where a train heads straight at the screen. Like they filmed a train approaching the camera, and people were so afraid they like ran away from the screen when they saw it. You'd be crazy to do that now. You'd be like, what? Obviously, it's on the flat TV.
Right.
So
yeah, it's the vampire films though are interesting thing to bring up because Count Orlok in the 20s, I guess the argument's been made that he sort of represented the danger of disease and pestilence and things like that. But he was evil. He was not. It's a natural thing that can happen, but he was this thing in society that was like. And then the actual vampire, but Dracula, the Bram Stoker novel, like that was a sort of. He represented, I think, a lot of things, but also like changing ideas about like sex and like it's dangerous and evil people are like gonna take these like good pure women and convert them or whatever,
corrupt them and drink their blood and
right. And I think that's an example of like I'm trying to like draw the line more concretely with Satanic Panic, but it's like an evil that exists in the world that people like see and are afraid of. And I think that Dracula kind of embodied that.
Yeah, it was in these, music that people thought was worshiping the devil, video or games like Dungeons and Dragons, things like that. It was like, it's fine when it's out there in the world. Or it's not fine, but, we acknowledge it's out there in the world. In the same way that Dracula is far away in his castle in Transylvania. He's this evil, he's somewhere else.
Yeah, but he comes to England.
Well, sure.
In the novel,
yeah, I know. The plot, but regardless, he comes to England, and that's the scary thing is now he's coming to our home. Things like metal music and Dungeons and Dragons were seen as like people literally bringing those things into your home,
into their mind, into their souls.
Yeah. So now suddenly it's not this evil that exists somewhere else out in the world. It's in your home, in your mind, and like I think there was a lot of concern about that.
It reminds me of I think it was a Bill Clinton ad. Maybe it was Hillary Clinton. It's that one. It's 3 a.m. Do you know where your children are? That political ad.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't know. They're going to get up to some horrible mischief. The devil lurks everywhere.
Yeah. It always feels like projection when people do that.
Well, yeah.
It's like
playing on people's fears.
Where are your kids? They must be doing something bad. You were a kid. You did something bad.
Right. Yeah. But it is interesting. I think Satanic Panic, it contains a lot of very ancient fears about society and evil and
yeah. There's always been that idea of good versus evil.
Yeah, and don't let your guard down because evil is everywhere.
Right. I think there was also like a big rise in secularism around that time as well. People were
in the 80s,
late 80s, early 90s. I think we were starting to enter a more secular era in general. That was around the time church scandals started becoming like a little more mainstream.
It's interesting because I think in maybe the 60s and 70s, people stopped going to church as much. And then there was this huge pushback of evangelicals and these mega churches and things. I think that was a very interesting tension that started to emerge in society in that time. Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those mega churches things were also the ones pushing this agenda to get people to come back to church and give them more money to make more mega churches.
That's a really interesting idea because it seems like this sort of just developed naturally in a way, but
I think there was definitely some sort of overarching manipulation to instill this fear. Because people could have easily, if they really wanted to tamp the fear down, if they didn't want this mass hysteria, the government or a larger institution like the Catholic Church could have come out and been like, you guys got to chill.
I don't think that's possible once you let the genie out of the bottle. I mean, look at like maybe this is not a perfect example, but like vaccines. Now that people are like, vaccines might be evil. The government can say all they want about that.
Well, people had more faith in the government back then. True.
Yeah. I don't know. These ideas, I think, are very pervasive.
Had let's say the Pope come out at the time and been like, Dungeons and Dragons isn't devil worship, folks.
I wonder if that would help or make the distance between the two groups even larger. Like it'll make the parents more panicked and the kids want to play the game more.
If they disavowed it, yeah.
I'm
saying, what if they were like, hey, it's fine.
Oh, I see.
The official stance was like, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. You can play it. If people would have still had that perception.
Maybe.
I think one of two things would have happened. Either they'd have been like, oh, okay, it's fine. The Catholic Church says it's fine. Or they'd be like, the church is corrupted. The demons got the Pope.
One other thing we can touch on before we finish up the episode is that voicemail, if you'd like.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a very interesting voicemail to prove to you that we do listen to these. Let me find the transcript just so a woman named Leslie called in. Hi, Leslie, if you're listening. Thank you for calling in. Let us know a very interesting story. Leslie told us after listening to the Kevin Curtis episode that she actually did kind of know Kevin Curtis via the internet, that they used to chat on like Yahoo. She said maybe Yahoo Messenger, could have been AIM, some sort of messaging app. And she says, anyway, so I've watched the first episode of Kings of Tupelo, the Netflix show about Kevin Curtis, and it's hysterical. I laughed the whole freaking time because like almost every word out of his mouth was just a lie, like down to when he bought his computer, because I know I was talking to him online before he bought that computer. So
that's so wild. Someone actually would like know him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like he was a hard person to miss in his
sure
in his town society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't even, I mean, she didn't say she's from Tupelo, so I don't know if like she said she talked to him online.
Yeah.
Could have been from anywhere. But it was very interesting. And I have many questions I would like to ask her now. But yeah, thank you for calling in, Leslie. I really got a kick out of your voicemail.
Yeah, we have a little podcast chat in Slack. We were all really interested to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't watched the documentary yet. You said you were maybe going to, but we're recording this so early.
I've not seen it yet.
Yeah.
I haven't had the time.
Yeah. But, we just talked last week, I think, was
yeah, it was only a week ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this episode's coming out on January 8th or whatever.
I want to say, yeah.
But we're recording it on December 13th.
Yes, Taylor Swift's birthday.
Happy birthday, Taylor Swift. This one's for you.
Right, a Satanic Panic.
Yeah. So we are recording this December 13th, just a week after we talked about the last episode. So no, I have not had a chance to watch it yet. I think it just came out.
Yeah, I think it was coming out like the day after
last night. So
it was published. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Recording.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe 2 nights ago, but
I guess that's maybe a good segue to say that if other people want to call in and talk about their experience with Satanic Panic in the 80s and 90s, or
if
what
you
they think
played
about
Dungeons and Dragons back then, how did your parents feel about it?
Yeah,
or anything?
Or now. Yeah, we do listen to all those voicemails. And yeah, you can call in at 929-526-3029. But if you are a millennial who's terrified of using the phone, that's fine. Yes. You can also email us at podcast@allit'sinteresting.com, and we read those too.
Yes. And of course, if you want to read more about anything we've talked about here, Kalina did an updated post on the Satanic Panic. I did one on the West Memphis 3. We have plenty of other stuff too. I believe we have a post that gets into the story behind the filming of The Exorcist, because that was an allegedly cursed movie set as well.
Oh, yeah. Lots of cursed Hollywood stuff.
Yeah, so we have some cursed movie set posts and other similar things on allthat'sinteresting.com. You can check that out. We're constantly updating and putting new stuff out. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of that, you can go to allthat'sinteresting.com/sign up to join our newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go to allthat'sinteresting.com/membership and become a member for just $5 a month. You get some, an ad-free reading experience, an exclusive dark mode, and access to our History Happy Hour episodes, where we're joined by our fellow writer Amber, and we talk about all the latest history news and anniversaries. There will not be one this month just because we're on a shortened schedule for the holidays, and I'm sure everyone listening will be busy for the holidays anyway and probably not listening to too many podcasts. But in January, we will be back with that. Stay tuned. Recommend the show to your friends if you like it. Give us a little 5-star rating, or I don't know what it's on. I don't know if Spotify does stars or it's just a thumbs up, but whatever, give it a good rating and a nice review.
Yeah.
Follow us on social media, History Uncovered Podcast on Instagram. Real History Uncovered on TikTok. If you want to see some short form, easily digestible content over there as well.
What about YouTube?
YouTube. We are just History Uncovered on YouTube. We have the full episodes up there. You might be listening to it, but there's also shorts as well.
Nice. And yeah, we'll be back. This episode, drops in January. And then after that, we'll have some more cool stuff, but we need to talk about what that's going to be.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
We'll get our schedule ready and, stay tuned. Hey, it'll for sure be interesting.
Always is.
Right. Happy New Year, everybody. Hope it went well. Hope the holidays were nice for you.
Happy 2025. Let's go.
Happy 2025. Let's see what happens.
It's going to be great.